Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of the 2023 District 6 Academy. Our goal here is to present important information about important topics and leave participants with tools to empower you to play a role in your own governance. Tonight's topic is the high cost of living, diving into Denver's affordable housing crisis. My name is Paul Kashmann. I have the honor of representing District 6 on Denver City Council. We have a full roster of 5 great speakers tonight, presenting a full breadth of perspective on our housing crisis. We'll take a moment to answer a couple of questions between speakers and aim to have a longer spot for question and answer at the end. Those of you who have registered will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the video of the evening's presentation, as well as a link to a summary. Let's get into the topic. Our first presenter, Councilwoman Kniech, is in the final weeks of a remarkable 12-year span as an at-large representative on Denver City Council. Her impressive list of legislative accomplishments has focused on fostering an equitable economy, housing stability, reducing homelessness, and improving our city's quality of life. Councilwoman Kniech has been the undeniable leader of Denver's efforts to create affordable housing. Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Councilman Kashmann. It's really exciting to join you here with District 6 and any resident from across the city or outside of it who's joining us tonight. I'm going to really give you a historical perspective of where Denver's been, and I'm excited to kick us off. You know, Denver is a city in an America that sells housing to the highest bidder and land as well. And that's an America that, with the exception of one-time dollars during this pandemic, has basically been reducing its investment in affordable housing over many decades. And it hasn't made a major infusion into building affordable housing since the World War II era, even as many communities in our nation have faced a growing housing crisis. The single largest housing subsidy in our nation is the home mortgage deduction, which disproportionately benefits those of higher incomes and which exacerbates racial disparities. So it's a little ironic because local governments, we're the smallest form of government. We have the fewest taxing powers, but we're on the front lines of housing stability. And that means that our residents have a really big expectation for us, but we have a little bit of a mismatch between the powers and tools we have and the expectations. But we understand why we need to be in this. And we have had a long journey of reconciling the expectations and needs of our community with our role. Over the past 12 years, we have transformed our role, and we're going to talk about what the framework for a comprehensive approach for cities like Denver can and should be. So let's start with talking about where we were in the 2000s, in that early part of the decade. So there were some big developments you've heard of that were coming online: the former Stapleton Airport, Green Valley Ranch, Lowry. And we did some big agreements that were really pushed by the city council to include affordable housing. People like Debbie Ortega that were on the council her first time around. They were council-led affordable housing commitments. But there was also a push that said, hey, we should have a policy. This shouldn't be one-off. And so you saw the city's first housing policy, which was an inclusionary housing ordinance. But there was a state law preventing rent control and a court decision that said that meant we could not require development of rental housing to include affordable housing. So that law could only apply to for sale housing. During that time in the 2005 range, Mayor Hickenlooper took a lot of, shall I say, kicks for having a plan that was called the 10-year plan to end homelessness. It was actually a really strong plan. It had a lot of best practices built into it. And the name was intended to get excitement that this is something that can be ended. 2 things really impeded its success. Number one, it did not come with sustainable funding from the city. It relied mostly on private fundraising. Number 2, the Great Recession hit in 2008. That was not John Hickenlooper's or anybody's fault. It really caused a rise in homelessness that was due to the economy and international and worldwide forces. Around then, that 2006 time, there was a movement starting in the early 2000s that really was my start. Sorry, having a little technical difficulty there. My start in this world of housing was really the community benefits movement. And anybody who was around Denver may remember the old Gates Rubber Factory on South Broadway. This was District 7, just next door to District 6. And the demand for community saying we wanted affordable housing and developments, and we wanted housing that the law couldn't deliver on its own, right? The community was saying we wanted affordable rental, even though the law couldn't provide it. And we finally got that first breakthrough, which was a commitment for affordable rental that was led by the community. 60 units was the first project that was built. Here's a picture of it. That site got stalled by that Great Recession, but there's still a housing agreement at that site, and it's actually going to be developed in the coming years. When it does, more affordable will be built. This was a tiny seed, but it was the start of a big transformation with higher expectations for the city. Fast forward, 2011 is when I got elected to council, as did some other progressives. And this was the state of affairs. You see the desert, right? No local funding for housing, no homeless or housing department. There was no city-owned shelter and no 24-hour homeless shelter. The only shelters that were 24 hours were like sobriety programs you had to be in. And we had that one policy. It was a pretty sad state of affairs. So this is what a comprehensive housing policy should look like or approach for a city. Supply does matter. You do have to have enough housing. And even for those who are the lowest income, supply never provides housing for those who are the poorest without subsidy. But you do, only 1 out of 4 people who need affordable housing live in subsidized housing. They actually do rely on market rate housing too. And they, string together too much of their own money to pay for housing. They double up, they use that market housing. So supply matters. Deed restricted, preserved. This is what we call capital A affordable housing. That's that green box on the right. But also we want to get people access to existing housing. That's what I was talking about, where people are getting into housing, maybe with a little bit of down payment assistance, maybe that first month's rent, they need help getting over that hump. And then the blue box, the cheapest thing is keeping someone in the home they already have. Melissa Mejia is going to talk a lot about that tonight. And then on the bottom, you need to shelter and rehouse people experiencing homelessness so that they stay in these housed boxes. You can't do any of this in Denver in 2011. There's no money, there's no personnel, there's no support for this strategy, but this is where we wanted to get. This is the ideal approach. So where did we start? We started in this green box, but we had some barriers. No one thought it was the city's job. They thought that we did parks, police, and, roads. That's what cities did. They also thought, who controls the money? The mayor really wanted flexibility to be able to control the budget each year. They were okay with one-time funds, but the idea of a fund that gave money to housing every year and that you could never change what that was used for took a while to get used to. And then, was there enough money to dedicate to housing? There was not. In 2011, we were still coming out of the recession, and anybody who knows Colorado knows Tabor. We were under some restrictions we had not fixed yet. It was hard times. It took us a few years to get through all these challenges, but we did. And then one big thing changed as well. In 2012, we passed the city's ban on urban camping. It was a very controversial vote. And what it did was it actually put the onus on the city. If we were going to ban people from using protection to stay safe from the elements when they experienced homelessness, we darn well better put our money where our mouth was to be able to provide more funding for housing. And that actually created more impetus to create our first housing fund. So here's what it looked like. First, we had this very simple investment, one-time funding for $3 million. That's before we got the convincing that we could be doing this over and over again. And then it grew from there, right? 3 million, 3 million, 8, up. And then, my slide didn't quite work. It grew all the way to the city's investment in a permanent fund. Sorry, my slide didn't work. We then got a permanent fund in 2016, and it grew all the way to $99 million in the first 8 years with that housing fund. There it shows you. All the way up to that first 8 years, it took us to get $90 million. Then that just shows you when you're working on housing, you can grow your wins over time. It's not about doing this all in one swoop. It's not about doing it all in one day. These are some of the impacts the housing fund has had in its first 5 years. Okay, these are some of the sources of funding that you see that we are relying on. It's not just one source of funding. Developers are contributing, taxpayers are contributing, marijuana users are contributing. This is how it stacks up this year. This is all of the sources of funding going into housing this year, but I want you to look over here on the left. The Affordable Housing Fund alone this year is $46 million. We also, you may remember, taxpayers and voters in Denver approved a fund for reducing homelessness. It is $48 million. You remember I showed you this slide. It took us 8 years to get to our first $99 million. This year alone, we have $99 million in local funds in just 1 year. That's transformational. By 2030, these two sources will probably have come to close to $1 billion in local funds for affordable housing. That's a really big deal. Denver is doing this together. Each of you listening to this call, I don't care where you live, you've probably bought something in Denver, you've contributed to this outcome. So what else has council done? It's not just about money. And what else have the partners, nonprofits, those doing services, many partners, what else have we done? Supply. We have more than a third, about a third, just under a third of the city zone for ADUs, more pending. We've built density near transit for more housing. We've also done this policy expanding housing affordability. This is where we had to change state law to allow us to require affordability in housing. And when we did that, it allowed us to require developers to do it. And these are some of the requirements: 8 to 15% affordability. Then what we have is a video. When you get this PowerPoint, you can watch the video to learn more about that law. We've also expanded access to people staying in their existing, to get access to existing homes. Here are some of the policies we've done there. And I just am going to keep going in the interest of time, but you can see a whole bunch of policies in each of these strategies. Strategies to keep people in their home. You're going to hear more about this again from Melissa. Expanded property tax rebate. These are not just things for renters. If you are a family with children, for the first time, we expanded property tax relief to low-income families with children to be able to get a little bit of property tax relief. It used to be just for seniors and those with disabilities, but it was not for families with children unless they had a disability or were a senior. So I want to show you this in the timeline. I showed you all the policies as they existed in the strategy, but I want to show you the timeline. Take a look at this. You see here, we had one policy in 2012, one in 2013, right? Couple in 2014. Watch how the speed picks up. We start to have more in 2017, more in 2018. Look at how it starts to speed up. Oh, I forgot to tell you, somewhere in here, 2015, a very important thing is Paul Kashmann gets elected right in there. I have to say, that was a year that we had more support elected to council, and it made a difference. We also saw that the housing crisis was starting to get worse. That created more political impetus and more political support for change. I'm going to end by talking about the way that the systems transformed on the bottom of that continuum, the homelessness continuum. So this is 2011. This slide looks better than it really was. This is the continuum of responses for people experiencing homelessness. It begins with overnight emergency shelter. That's basically what we did. You checked in at night, you got a bed, maybe a shower, maybe a meal. I shouldn't say maybe, you got a bed, shower, and meal. You woke up in the morning, you had to leave for the day. That on the left is mostly what we did. The city did not even fund it very much. We mostly only funded extra beds in the winter. The other things on this, we did very little of. We gave a few motel vouchers to families. We maybe gave some federal, and we did a little of this with federal funding. None of this on this chart was funded with city funds. And then we had a couple projects for those who were housing for those experiencing homelessness, but there was no dedicated source of funding. And there were like 2 or 3 of them from Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Very old projects that had been funded with traditional sources. This is what our system looks like in 2023. Every single thing on this slide is something our city is funding today with local dollars. Many of them also have federal dollars that came from the pandemic. Many of these things did not exist before. They filled gaps. We have 24-hour shelter with services now, not just a bed, not just a meal, but a housing navigator, a mental health support, a health provider. We have things that are keeping people off the streets who weren't a good fit for shelter, like safe outdoor spaces and tiny homes. And we have, everyone, this is really important. We have an entire strategy for housing people experiencing homelessness that is keeping people housed 86% after 1 year. But I want you to know this, it's still almost 80% successful in year 2 and 3 too. We have a pipeline of more than 25 of these homes that we have funding for. That will almost double the number of homes we have for people experiencing homelessness today. Okay. And they're not homeless anymore because they will have homes. We have a guide to help neighbors who are learning about this housing coming to their neighborhoods so you can learn more about it. And then here are all the outcomes, because my time is up, everyone. And I'm so grateful to get to talk to you about all of this work. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share, see if I have any questions I can answer. And I want to just say one more thing. You should ask me, if we did all this great transformational work, why did it get harder? How did it get worse in Denver? And I have 2 answers for you. One, we got started way too late. We got 86,000 apartments built in this city from 2000 till 2020-ish. And we couldn't require affordability in most of those apartments because state law prevented us. We missed a lot of time. And we didn't have that funding until 2016, and it was late, right? So we lost a lot of years when we could have been getting ahead. So that's one reason why it got worse during the years that we were doing this work, is we got a really late start due to legal prohibitions and, not having that funding sooner. The second reason is that the scale of the things we're doing are working, but they are not sized to the proportion of the need. Remember what I said at the beginning, we sell land to the highest bidder in America. That's not something government can change the rules on. And so we are not to proportion. So those are the answers. You can always ask me more, but thank you so much, everyone.